All right, so good morning. On behalf of the Washington Teachers Union, we are delighted to have you here to participate and share in the 2018 Shared Vision Conference. Thank you for coming. That many of you have traveled long distances and given up your time on a Saturday. I know you could be doing something else. It's beautiful outside today, too. Reminds us just how important is the work that we do. My name is Derek Simmons, and I am a proud mathematics teacher at the Eastern Senior High School, as well as the chair of the Shared Visions Conference Planning Committee. The Washington Teachers Union recognizes the challenge that its members face every day in the classroom. Today, I speak for those teachers. Teachers know what it feels like to teach algebra to a student who struggles to do basic arithmetic. We feel the same pain when we see the growing achievement gap. 2017 National Assessment of Educational Progress report found that only 32% of fourth graders and 21% of eighth graders score proficient or above in math. Those numbers dropped to 18 and 9% for black students and 29 and 18% for Hispanic students, respectively. Quoting Elizabeth Davis, the president of the WTU, "We cannot sit on our hands and do nothing to reverse the abysmal test score results." So this year, the theme of our Washington Teachers Union Shared Vision Conference is Math Literacy, Key to Educational Equity and Excellence. Today, through workshops, discussions, and demonstrations, you will explore award-winning pedagogical techniques for teaching math developed by civil rights icon Dr. Robert Moses. Collectively, the techniques are called the Algebra Project. Prepare yourself to be challenged, excited, and inspired. Our open plenary session has 4 great speakers who have dedicated their lives to education. First, you will hear from the president of the Washington Teachers Union, Elizabeth A. Davis. Next, you will hear from the acting Deputy Assistant Director for the Education and Human Resources Division of the National Science Foundation, Dr. Sylvia M. James. Prior to Dr. James' various roles at the NSF, she has served as the Director of Education for the National Aquarium in Baltimore. Dr. James will be followed by Dr. Bob Moses. Dr. Moses is known for his work as a leader of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee on the Voter Education and Registration in Mississippi during the 1960s Civil Rights Movement. Dr. Moses is also the founder of the Algebra Project, a national nonprofit organization that uses mathematics as an organizing tool to ensure quality public school education for every child in America. Finally, we will hear from Ken Cherry, the Deputy Chief of STEM for the District of Columbia Public Schools. Ms. Cherry previously served as the Director of Professional Development at the National Science Teachers Association, as well as the Executive Director of the Mathematics and Science Teachers Institute at Xavier University of Louisiana in New Orleans. Ms. Cherry has also taught in Prince George County, Maryland for 10 years and has over 17 years of experience in education. So, as I hand over to President Davis, I want to say once more, on behalf of the Washington Teachers Union and the Shared Visions Conference Planning Committee, welcome. Please give our speakers a round of applause.
Thank you, Derek, and good morning. Good morning. Before I begin rambling on, I want to acknowledge the work that Derek Simmons has done in taking over this planning committee and just basically running with it. I didn't have to do anything, look over my shoulder, and I simply wanted to acknowledge him and, of course, the WTU staff for pulling this conference together. I also want to thank our amazing executive board, and I know that some of them are in this audience now. You will have a chance to meet them during the working lunch today, so I don't want to take time to go further with any introductions. And, of course, I also want to welcome our special guests, some of whom will remain throughout the day, some will have to leave, and of course many of them will remain for a special legislative session that we designed for city leaders and policymakers. You know, and I'm excited about a lot of things, but I'm really excited about what is about to happen in this school district because of you. Because of the amazing teachers in the school district whose voices have basically been silent, quashed over the past 10 years. And in visiting schools, I've met teachers that I'd never worked with before, reflected on those that I have from my very first year as a teacher at Jefferson Academy, and thought about the powerful force of teachers we have in the school district. Unheard, and in many cases unassisted. But that is coming to an end. And it's not going to happen as a result of any superhero or Superman. It's going to happen as a result of you. Because the teachers that I've worked with and met throughout the district this year and the past 3 years and visiting every school are some of the most amazing, powerful teachers I have ever met. Your voice has been missing from the dialogue around education reform, and that is one of the reasons we're having issues today with some of the gaps that Derek mentioned earlier. In 2014, in this very conference center, we shared in a room upstairs a vision, a solution going forward with policymakers, council members, State Board of Ed members about the achievement gap, the opportunity gap. And later on you may hear another label attached to it, but the point of it is, I was absolutely disappointed that the growth of those gaps from 2007 till now has gone to over 50 scale score points in 10 years. And I could not understand why there was no outrage. So in 2014, we put that on the radar of every council member, mayor, deputy mayor, every State Board of Ed member to say, it stays here until it is addressed, until you include other stakeholders in coming up with a solution. And of course, the poor students, the students in the lowest quartile in this city, are the ones that are falling through the cracks, being ignored. Some of the data that we hear over the past 10 years, some of it has been media spin. Some of it has been an opportunity to think or make others believe that we were doing, that all children were moving forward, and that has not been the case. When I began my career at Jefferson Academy in 2000, well, no, I won't say what year, but I was an engineering student who realized that after 2 years and working 1 year on an architect, it was not my area. I needed to socialize with people. I was asked by one of my professors to teach 1 year and see if that worked. I was sent to Jefferson Academy, and I never looked back. Of course, my first day I was greeted by a principal who had never heard of a female drafting teacher. So he asked me to leave and report back to Human Resources. I reported back to the central office, but it was a file of Title IX sex discrimination complaint. So that decision was overturned, and I was returned to the school the next day. Did I have a good year? No. And of course, did that silence me? No. What it did teach me was that there were other reasons why I've been called to teach. And all of them didn't have to do with the 3 R's. Well, there were other R's, like resistance and revolution and rising up. But teaching the basics and going beyond that was an exciting opportunity for me. And after 2 years, I realized that my classroom was actually being used as a laboratory for social justice. Because the second semester, the girls that were enrolled in my drafting class were told that they could not enter into the non-traditional courses for boys, plastics, woodworking, construction, manufacturing. All of those were available at the school. And I said, of course, we can't do this because I've already informed them that they can take any course they want. So I had to turn around and file one on behalf of the female students at Jefferson Junior High School. The classes were open up to all girls. Did it create problems at the beginning? But it also taught students a lesson because our students are watching us every day. Not only what we're teaching them on the lesson plan, they're also watching our behavior, our actions, how we respond to social injustices in our school, whether we stand up, whether we support them, speak out, advocate for them. So they're learning those lessons too. And we've got to be careful about which ones we choose to teach. So I learned that first year what collaboration meant, the power of collaboration. Because I didn't know what I was doing. I had a few T-squares and triangles, but I noticed that my students were not all getting it at the same time. I wanted to teach them how to read the engineer scale up to the 62nd of an inch. Well, I was still trying to get past 1/2 and 1/4, but it took some of them longer, but they got it. I simply didn't understand because I was expecting them all to learn at the same rate on the same day. And one of the teachers came next door to my room one day and she said, "Why do you have 42 students?" I said, "I don't know. What am I supposed to have?" She said, "Not this many. So I didn't know. She asked me, do you know you have 15 special education students in your class? I didn't know what that was either. I'm glad I didn't. Because to me, they were all students who could achieve, who could learn what I wanted to teach, and they did. But what she also said was she noticed that there was a huge leap in their ability to add, multiply, subtract fractions. And she wanted to see why. So I demonstrated for her a lesson on how they were doing isometric drawings, designing truss bridges, how they had to measure the angles. And she said, this is exactly why they're doing so much better in fractions. She became my mentor, my coach, best friend, and to this day, I will never forget Mrs. Broadus, because she assisted me. She first of all, she came to let me know that whatever you're doing, and I know that you don't know what you're doing, Ms. Davis, but whatever you're doing, the students you're able to grasp the geometry skills that I tried to teach. And she finally discovered that it was because they were applying it to something real. And the two of us worked together every year after that. That type of collaboration doesn't happen now in our schools. Oh shoot, we have something called collaboration. LEAP, spoon-fed, force-fed collaboration. I'm talking about authentic mentoring, coaching, collaboration, and support. This conference is going to be about those supports needed in order for us to turn this school district around, change direction. And it'll come from you. And you will be amazed at how others perceive your power and your authority to change things in the school district. Because all of the change is not going to come from the top down. It's going to come from you who are in the classrooms every day working closest to students, and you know how to teach students in different ways based on their needs. You know what supports they need, and you are very passionate about your work. And I don't want to take any more time, because the three people that you're going to hear from now understand that as well. And why I'm so excited is because it's all coming together at the same time, at the right moment. And with you in the room, here on a bright Saturday afternoon, says that you are the right people. And I want to thank you for being here. So I was glad that nobody told me at the beginning of my career that there would be a time when I would have to teach to a test or to a scripted curriculum or no curriculum. If they had told me that, I probably would have left the system. But I was never a traditional teacher that stayed in the lines. My classroom walls did not restrict me from teaching what I needed to teach. And we're going back there because we have some of the most creative, innovative teachers in the city once we remove the constraints that are put on them. And this is the time. I'm now going to turn the mic over to Dr. Sylvia James.
Good morning, and thank you, President Davis. It's a pleasure to be here. As was mentioned, in another life, I was Director of Education at the National Aquarium in Baltimore, so I have a great fondness for teachers and teacher workshops and the incredible work that you do. Least of all because that is why I'm here, because of great teachers in Baltimore City Public Schools, where I went to school. So currently I'm the acting Deputy Assistant Director the Director for Education and Human Resources at the National Science Foundation, just down the road in Alexandria, Virginia. NSF was founded in 1950. Our mission is to promote the progress of science and advance the national health, prosperity, and welfare, secure the national defense, etc. And our vision is that NSF is a global leader in research and innovation. I hope that you're somewhat familiar with NSF. Hopefully you participated in a teacher workshop supported by NSF, a teacher institute. Maybe you used some curricula that was supported by NSF, or you're using strategies that may have been supported or discovered using through NSF-funded research. NSF also supports, in addition to K-12 education, teacher development, research on learning, etc. We also have a program on advancing informal STEM learning, which is what the first program that I worked with when I came to NSF. And you may have seen the NSF logo on various science education, radio, and television programs, as well as large format films, IMAX films. So we're looking at education in school, out of school, for all ages. I wanted to pull this information from our strategic plan, which lists the 3 strategic goals: expanding knowledge, advancing the capability of the nation, and enhancing NSF's performance of its mission. But specifically to draw your attention to objective 2.2 under the second goal, which is to foster the growth of a more capable and diverse research workforce and advance the scientific and innovation skills of the nation. So in addition to all of the things that I mentioned, NSF is cognizant of the fact that we need to look ahead to the future STEM workforce, or science, technology, engineering, and math workforce, and ensure that it looks like the population of the nation in terms of diversity. So we did run through the slides to make sure everything came out okay, but this picture of this adorable child is cut in half. But the point is shown on the top of the slide, that the education of the scientists and engineers and the public of 2050 begins today. We need the best talent, and we need to make sure that we are drawing from all segments of society, developing talent from everywhere, from all groups. So NSF uses the term broadening participation, which is a shorthand for diversity. We seek to broaden the participation of all groups, especially those that are underrepresented in the sciences. And we say STEM for short, and you probably heard that acronym. It's of critical importance. I wanted to give you, if you're not familiar with NSF, and most people aren't familiar with all that we've done, unless you're a real, someone who is a grantee or very much interested in the history of the agency. But I indicated that we were founded in 1950. In 1980, by act of Congress, there was a committee established called the Committee on Equal Opportunities in Science and Engineering, CEOS. And every 2 years, CEOS publishes a report which basically gives a status report on NSF's efforts in broadening participation in STEM, what the portfolio looks like. And at the back of that report, there are a couple of pages which lay out the broadening participation portfolio. And I'll say a little bit more about that later. So you notice there was this gap from 50 to 80 where there wasn't a lot going on. There was a few programs initially when the agency first opened. The most that they did in terms of diversity was address women a little bit in some of the programs. But things really started to ramp up in the 1990s with the launch of a number of programs. And again, being a Fed, I speak in acronyms, but these are all available on the website. LSAMP stands for the Lewis-Stokes Alliances for Minority Participation, which is a program designed to increase the number of students from groups that are underrepresented in STEM fields earning bachelor's degrees. But they also have a component that supports students in graduate school as well. There were programs for students with disabilities, which is RDE, Research and Disabilities Education, Gender Studies in Science and Engineering, GSE, and the Minority Postdoctoral Research Fellowships began. And you may be familiar with Urban Systemic Initiative programs that were supported in the 90s. Currently, there's a program called the EHR Core Research, or ECR for short, which has a component that's focused on research and broadening participation in STEM, as well as within the Directorate for Social Behavior and Economic Sciences, an initiative focused on the science of broadening participation. What does it take? What are strategies that work? What's most effective in terms of reaching those segments of society that are not currently represented in the STEM workforce in the same percentages that they are in the U.S. population? And so currently the broadening participation portfolio, if you look across the entire agency, is about $926.5 million. That was as of 2017. And that includes programs where, what we call focus programs, where the majority of the budget is addressing broadening participation, and emphasis programs where a smaller percentage, where it's less than 50%. So one of the things that I had someone do in preparation for the program that I'm going to talk about next was to do an inventory. We had a contractor do an inventory to look in depth at our portfolio. What does it really look like over in recent years? So from 2000 to 2015, they looked across the agency to see what we've done in this area, there had been 85 programs focused on increasing diversity in STEM or broadening participation across all education levels. In general, if you look at those programs, they focus on things like institutional goals and especially capacity building in some institutions that don't have sufficient resources to support their STEM education programs. A lot of planning, dissemination, and research partnerships. The directorate that I work in, Education and Human Resources, is one of 7. The other 6 directorates are focused on the science investment areas: biological sciences, geosciences, engineering, social behavior and economic sciences, SCIES, computer information sciences, math and physical sciences, and so on. But in EHR, which is focused on education, we have divisions that focus on undergraduate education and graduate education. The Division of Research on Learning in Formal and Informal Settings, or DRL, includes K-12 and out of school that I mentioned. And my permanent appointment is Director of the Division of Human Resource Development, which is the division that has programs for the entire portfolio is broadening participation. There are programs for tribal colleges, for HBCUs, women, a program called Advance, which focuses on advancing women in academia, and the Lewis Stokes Alliances for Minority Participation that I mentioned. And I should specifically mention, I hope that you're aware of the Presidential Awards for Excellence in Math and Science Teaching, or PAINTS. That's run by NSF in conjunction with the White House. We really need applications from teachers of color. They are very much underrepresented in the awards that are made through the PAINTS program each year. So I would encourage you to, if it's something that you've thought about, you say, I don't have time to do this, it's too much work, do it. You can search paints.org, PAEMST.org. I don't have any handouts, but I have some cards that I'll leave on the table, and you can contact me, or you go to the NSF website to look for more information on that program. Okay, 9 minutes. I have to time myself because I'll get carried away here. The second half of my presentation, I want to tell you about some one program in particular that's addressing the issue related to diversity in the STEM workforce. And it's one of what we call NSF's 10 big ideas. And these are areas of investment that we hope are really on the frontiers of science and engineering. They are looking at collaboration across all types of stakeholders, and really, hopefully, we hope defining the cutting edge of science. I don't have time to go into these, but you can Google NSF's 10 big ideas, and there's a video that talks about each of the areas. There's 6 research ideas: harnessing the data revolution, work at the human technology frontier, navigating the new Arctic, Windows on the Universe, which is looking at multi-messenger astrophysics, quantum leap, looking at quantum physics, understanding the rules of life, predicting phenotype. And then there are 4 process ideas. One looking at mid-scale research infrastructure, NSF 2026, what should we be focusing on in that year after we've hopefully addressed in some measure these 10 big ideas. Convergent research. As you know now, if you're math or science teachers, that you can't teach math without delving into some other area of science. There's this continual overlap. If you're a biology teacher and you're talking about genetics and the human genome, and there's convergence of different types of STEM content that you have to address. And so that's what that's all about. And then I'm going to talk about something called NSF Includes. As I said, we love acronyms in the federal government. This stands for, but this is a mouthful, inclusion across the nation of communities of learners, of underrepresented discoverers in engineering and science. So NSF Includes for short. So this is a comprehensive initiative to enhance U.S. leadership in science and engineering discovery. But really, again, what I said at the beginning, we're really looking to develop STEM talent from all sectors and groups in our society for the future workforce. Includes is a little bit different. We're using different approaches, a framework called collective impact, which has been used for social innovation types of projects, so it's not just limited to the science, but what it really does is bring together collaborators who have a common interest to focus on really challenging problems. In this case, problems related to broadening participation. How do we get over the hump? How do we increase the numbers? Just as President Davis talked about the achievement gap or the achievement opportunity, we have the same issue in terms of numbers of individuals going into the sciences, or if they go in, persisting and staying in. So this called for new approaches. That organization that I mentioned earlier, CIOS, basically said to NSF, look, you've been investing millions of dollars in broadening participation for years, and the numbers have not changed in terms of the percentages of African Americans in STEM, and Native Americans in STEM, and Hispanic Americans in STEM. You got to change what you're doing, try some new approaches. And so this is one of the big ideas, again, looking at changing the composition, diversifying the composition of the workforce. It relies heavily on all types of partnerships. And what I say, the way I frame this is not just the usual suspects. Sure, we need higher education institutions, but what about K-12 schools and administration, community colleges, corporations, laboratories? Who has an interest in what that future STEM workforce looks like? All of us. And so we need to have everyone at the table. This is fine print, and so I'll just skim over this, and hopefully you can get a copy of the presentation later, but this talks about the multi-year strategies for Includes. It's a 10-year initiative, we hope, if the funding is sustained over that period of time, really supporting partnerships and networks, could be local, regional, discipline-specific, interdisciplinary, multidisciplinary, but bringing all of these stakeholders to the table with the goal of hopefully creating what we call the Includes National Network. Supporting stakeholders from disciplines to identify shared goals and objectives that are central for success in achieving inclusion in high-quality science learning opportunities. And of course, because we're NSF, research has to be at the center of this effort. So supporting research-informed activity and synthesizing what we learn from across the projects and building our understanding, the research base, to help define and measure broadening participation efforts and foster the spread and adaptation of proven effective practices. So just a couple more slides here. There are 3 essential components to NSF Includes. design and development launch pilots, which were 2-year initiatives, $250,000, I believe, an opportunity to test approaches to address some of these broadening participation challenges. We're now at the point where we funded 2 years of the pilots, and we moved on to alliances. We have a competition where you go from $250,000 or $300,000 to over $10 million, because the challenge is scaling up some of these strategies. So if you were able to prove that you had an effective approach to address something like, ensuring that students are math proficient so they can succeed in undergraduate STEM programs, then that's what the Alliance is for. And then to ensure that there's cohesion and continuity across the portfolio, we're funding something called a coordination hub that'll hopefully increase communications across projects and serve as the foundation for this national network focused on broadening participation in STEM. Just a little bit about the portfolio of launch pilots. We funded 70 so far, and over 40, I think, in the first year in 2016, 30 in 2017. This is a little bit about what they are doing. There are 5 projects that are focusing on expanding access to quality STEM education for underrepresented groups. 10 projects that are developing or transforming STEM identity, attitudes, motivation. Those non-cognitive factors, research has shown, are just as critical as the cognitive ones. The majority of the projects, 39, are providing STEM engagement and preparatory experiences for students and communities that promote knowledge of interest in and preparation for STEM studies and careers. So it's a diverse portfolio. I said partnerships are critical, so there are over 700 partnerships across all of these different stakeholder groups, which I mentioned. The grade level focus for these projects, you can see that, and some do multiple grade levels, so this is not going to add up to 70. So over 40 are focusing on K-12 students, a little more than that, about 45 post-secondary, and then less than 10 are focusing on other audiences. So to wrap up, NSF is making a real effort to increase our effectiveness in terms of these broadening participation programs. This is just an example of the range of programs in the portfolio. I mentioned the 4 divisions in my directorate, but I encourage you to go to the website and explore to see if any of these programs resonate with you. While you can't, some school districts have applied for funding. We don't fund individuals unless it's for scholarships or fellowships, but school districts, some schools have been, individual schools, okay, that's my time, have done a good job and been competitive and able to get funding through NSF. I can answer some of those questions, but there are other program officers who are certainly happy to talk with you. So I know I went through things pretty quickly. I won't be around for too much longer after this session, but you can reach me if you have thoughts about big ideas in STEM education and STEM education research. Thank you, and have a great conference.
How's everybody? I'm good. Thank you. Yeah. So in the audience this morning, we have participants who are responding to the NSF Includes solicitation. And the response is based on the Mississippi theater of the civil rights movement for voter registration, voter insurgency in Mississippi in the 1960s. And if you think about that movement, there were representatives of the 4 major civil rights organizations who formed an alliance. Mega Evers was the representative of the Mississippi NAACP. Dave Dennis was the representative of Mississippi CORE, the Congress of Racial Equality. Aaron Henry was the representative of SCLC, Dr. King's organization, the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. And I was the representative for SNCC, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. And what we said was that what allowed us to come together, and it probably was the only theater of the civil rights movement where all 4 of those organizations worked on a common goal. We restricted our work to getting the right to vote for the African American population in Mississippi. We didn't have what was just described as the kind of collaborating institutions. We didn't have any of those. What we did was collaborate with the people who had the problem. The sharecroppers themselves, the day laborers, the domestic workers. And so that's how we did our work then. And what we did was the participants who were here joined with others from across the nation and responded to NSF's call for what they called DDLPs, Design and Development Launching Pilots, around this idea of broadening participation in STEM. And we told NSF, look, what we want to do is focus on the bottom quartile of the nation's population, students in the public schools, and we want to establish for them a standard for math literacy for the 21st century. And we said that the only appropriate standard for them is that that they graduate high school, and when they graduate, they are ready to do college math for college credit, no remediation, right? And if they have a career choice, that math should not be an obstacle to their career choice. And then the second thing we said was that as far as collaboration goes, we actually want to follow the model that happened in Mississippi with the voter registration. We want to collaborate with the students who have the problem. So we want at the center of our project the actual students in the bottom quartile, the teachers who teach them, the administrators, and the communities that support them. And so based on that, we formed the beginning of an alliance with those constituents, and then added universities and colleges and national institutions that have been dealing with this problem. And so what this conference is about is the idea that the nation is revving up its attempt to actually include people who have been left out in this issue of STEM. And we, the people who are here, have decided to form an alliance and participate in this effort. And so we have applied to NSF, but whether we get funded or not, we are intending to actually form an alliance around this issue. So there are a couple of policy issues that I want to call our attention to around this issue. One is the issue of teachers, right? The nation simply doesn't have the teachers that it needs to do this. I don't know if you're familiar with the Gathering Storm report, but Senator Lamar Alexander, as the century began, asked the National Academy of Sciences to put together a report to the nation about its needs for STEM. and it asked them to list in order the 10 most important things that the country should do. They issued that report in 2005. It's called The Gathering Storm. The first bullet that it said the country should do was that it should supply 10,000 more math and science teachers annually, and that it should also fund with extra money those who were willing to go into underserved communities. So what happened? So the Republicans and President Bush did a Hail Mary in 2006, and they announced America Competes. No legislation, no money. They reissued the report in 2010, and the Democrats and President Obama did their version of a Hail Mary. They announced 100,000 in 10 years. No legislation, no money. So we're in a real situation, folks. We need these teachers. It isn't clear that the country has any intention of providing the teachers that are really needed to do this program. So that's one big policy issue that faces us. So there's another issue that we're grappling with, and it has to do with this issue of the gap metaphor. So in the 1930s, Conant, who was president of Harvard, decided that he wanted public school students to be able to attend Harvard, and he used, developed, or rather used a test that had been developed that was called SAT, right? And we know about the SAT now. So the country has evolved with the idea that we value what we can measure, right? And so this SATs and these tests are a way of measuring things. And so now we value what we can measure, but there's a problem there because it turns our attention to tests, which is the wrong focus. Right? And so the alliance that we're putting together wants to flip that. It wants to ask, what do we value, right? And how do we measure what we can value instead of valuing what we know how to measure, right? So this is a big issue. It means that the Alliance is investigating what do we value about teaching in math, what do we value about how to teach math. And Liz Davis was giving us an excellent example of both of those questions with her work earlier. And then that raises the question also, well, how do we learn how to measure what we value, right? So those are issues that we have to deal with. So the gap metaphor, yes, it's out there, but it points us in the wrong direction. When we say that what we are looking at is a standard of math literacy for the bottom quartile, we want to call our attention to, well, what's the platform that's needed for the 21st century in math? And this leads to the last thing I want to talk about, which is the preamble. Right? And I want to relate all of these questions to the big question that the country has grappled with since it started. And to start that conversation for the next 5 minutes, I'm going to ask us to do the preamble with me. Right? So, we the people of the United States. Yeah, we're not so good. Okay, let's start over again. Ready? Okay. We, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty for ourselves and our posterity, do ordain and establish this Constitution for the United States of America. Okay, now I'm going to tell you a story, and then I'm going to relate that story back to the preamble. Okay. So I was on the witness stand in the spring of 1963 in the Federal District Court in Greenville, and SNCC had organized a voter registration campaign in Greenwood, and a SNCC car had been grease gunned, machine gun really, but they call it grease gun. And Jimmy Travis, one of the SNCC field secretaries, had caught a bullet. And then SNCC decided, well, we're going to bring all of our SNCC field secretaries and focus on Greenwood in response to this terrorism. And then we said, well, look, you people out here, you don't have your federal commodities or food because of politics. So we raised some political food from Chicago. And Dick Gregory threw it down. And then we told people, if you want some of this political food, you got to do a political action. You got to go down and register to vote, just straight up, right? And so hundreds of sharecroppers went down to register to vote. They arrested the SNCC field secretaries. And at that time, Kennedy was still president. Bobby Kennedy was the Attorney General. Burke Marshall was the Assistant Attorney General for Civil Rights. And so Burke filed suit against the city of Greenwood and had our cases removed to the Federal District Court in Greenville. So he sent John Doerr to be our lawyer. We bust over sharecroppers, and they packed the court on the benches and lined the halls, and I'm peering over John's shoulder, looking at these sharecroppers and thinking about the question, the only question that the federal district judge Clayton asked. He wanted to know, why is SNCC taking illiterates down to register to vote? So sharecropper illiteracy was the subtext of the right to vote, and sharecropper education was the practice that led to sharecropper illiteracy. So what is sharecropper education? Well, sharecropper education is an education that says you are pre-assigned work and you get at best the education for the work which you have been pre-assigned. Right? So now back to the preamble. So as the country began, the preamble designated a set of people who were its constitutional people. White men who owned property. But in Article 4, Section 2, Paragraph 3, the Constitution designated another set of constitutional people, in this case, Africans, who were constitutional property, owned by the people who were designated in the preamble. Right? So what kind of education, right, were the Africans to get? Well, what was their work? They were slaves, right? And so for 75 years, Africans in this country got no education, right? Because to read or to write was to endanger their political situation. And of course, the Africans themselves, right, they fought to own themselves, right? And so their idea was to change their constitutional status from constitutional property to constitutional people. And so that was our education program in this country for Africans for the first 75 years of our constitutional eras. So then we had the big war, and then we had an effort at Reconstruction, and then finally in 1875 we had our second, what I call, constitutional era. And now the Africans are now African Americans, right? And the question is, what is to happen with their education? Well, I would ask you to Google Circular 3591. So that's Circular 3591. Well, in 1941, 5 days after Pearl Harbor, on December 12th, President Roosevelt instructs his Attorney General, Francis Biddle, to issue a circular to every state prosecuting attorney. And he instructs them that they are no longer to look at the situation where young black men are rounded up by the tens and tens of thousands and sent into the mines to be the human capital for this industrial revolution that's going on. He says that they should now prosecute as involuntary servitude or slavery this practice of rounding up young black men. So what was the work, right, for African Americans in this era? Well, it was either on the plantations, right, or in the mines, and 90% of African Americans in this era are in the South, right? So when the judge was asking me about why are we taking illiterates down to register to vote, the subtext of his question was this practice of the country that for purposes of their education, African Americans at best, right, get an education for this kind of work, right? So they're no longer slaves, but they are no longer really citizens of the country. So then we have the Voting Rights Act, the Civil Rights Act of 1964-65, and we're into our current congressional era. And the issue before us on the education front is the same. It's the issue of sharecropper education. Right? Because if you think about the last election cycle, what the subtext of that cycle said was that in this country, most of the children are getting a version of sharecropper education. That the work that they have been educated for is the work of the 20th century. The work in which the country was in the industrial age, right? And it was factory work, right? Between the 20th century and the 21st century has arisen information age technologies, right? And they bring with it a quantitative literacy. So the judge was asking about reading and writing literacy. He wasn't thinking about quantitative literacy. But the transition from industrial to information age technology brings quantitative literacy on the table, just like reading and writing. And in this country, that means algebra. Algebra is the dividing line between just doing post office arithmetic, being able to function at the post office, and being able to think that you can work with computers and the languages that they require. So the alliance that we are trying to fund and build is concerned with this issue of math literacy that's appropriate for the 21st century. And so this conference is a kickoff to try to see how in Washington, D.C., we can build a local alliance that would be part of a network of alliances across this country, and hopefully will be supported in this effort. Thank you very much.
I'm supposed to follow that. Good morning, everyone. I'm Kim Cherry, and I'm the Deputy Chief of STEM for DCCS. And so I first want to say what an honor to be on a panel with three powerhouses for real. The work that you all do and have done help us each day to continue on. So thank you very much, and thank you for the invitation and the honor. So I have a question for the folks in the audience. When you think about STEM, what do you think about? Science, math.
A sign outside your building.
A sign outside your building. Period. No. Yes. Yes. Select the students. Mm-hmm.
Adequate resources.
Resources. Thank you. So, let me tell you a little bit about my story. I am a product of a Title I school. I grew up in New York City, and I was that student, PS21. I was in the low reading group. So I was in the low reading group in first grade. In second grade, so, you know, we had the level readers. I was in the city. The book was in the city. Grade 1. Grade 2, I was still in the city. Same book, different grade. I struggled with literacy for a long time and learning to read and read well. And so oftentimes we come to spaces like this and focus on literacy, particularly for poor Black kids. Black and brown kids, they need to learn how to read. End all be all. Stop it right there. We can't do anything until they learn how to read, which is right. But that is not it. So I come to this work because I was that poor student. Poor in terms of opportunity. So we didn't learn science in elementary school. We sat a long time for reading, and for those like me who were not strong readers, they weren't pleasant spaces. However, I went to school in the 70s, and at a time where the Black Power movement was very strong, and so all my teachers were Black. And so we had opportunities to do other things, particularly in mathematics, which was a good thing, thank God, so I could come to school, right? So when I think about this work, I think about myself. So I struggled with reading in elementary school, junior high school, college, have mercy, graduate school. I'm in book clubs now, I'm in school now, so it never stops. But does that stop my level of intelligence or growing or learning? No. So when I think about this work, I think about the little Black girls that are sitting in classrooms right now that are just like me, that will totally geek out on earth, space, science, because that's what I love. And I think oftentimes we have hindered the work so that we are focusing on children just learning how to read and not really giving them opportunities to learn and grow as learners. And it is not just about reading, it is about other things. So I come to STEM education with that lens. And a lot of it for me has been love. I can say that to my 10 years in Prince George's County. I was teaching, they needed science teachers, the state wanted more science teachers, so I got a degree in science education. As soon as I finished that, they wanted teachers in math education, so I have a degree in that. And recently, through NSF funding, I am completing a degree in science education because the country needs more science educators. So I come to this work with that background. So now I want to talk about what I do every day in terms of what STEM education is, what it means for me, and what it means for me to work in the city that I live, in the city that I'm invested. And so STEM education in DC, I got here 2014, and at the time there were 3 people in the math department and 1 person doing science education. They was like, oh, okay, Kim, do STEM. So when I talk about STEM is about integration. However, the basis of that is having a solid math and science curriculum. So we can talk about STEM, and we can talk about STEM in urban education, so it's not just a sign. But let's now talk about the foundational pieces of understanding what that means. And that means having quality math and science resources. So I come to this work also knowing that as a district, we have grown, but we have much further to go. And so STEM education is about providing opportunities for all students, but also having some foundational work and resources in math and science. So now that I actually have a team, we actually have a science team, we actually have a comprehensive mathematics team with some really smart people. And when I say team, let's be clear, it does not look like the literacy team. And that's okay, because we have quality people doing the work of supporting teachers, and that is what really matters. And so we are committed to providing teachers the resources that they need in order to help their students grow. Because at the end of the day, 2050 is right here, and our students are the ones that will lead to the future. Those are the folks that will be in your seats in a couple of years wanting to do the same thing. So, what have we done in DCPS? And I believe that it's a systemic matter. So whether you teach early childhood, elementary, middle, or high, it is really about the comprehensive view of math and science education. And so in the early childhood space, we have collaborated with the National Air and Space Museum and the 100K and 10 group, which is, the goal is to get 100,000 STEM teachers in 10 years. 2 weeks ago, we were in Arizona, Phoenix, Arizona, working with groups from around the country on this work. In DC, we have a collaboration with the Air and Space Museum and OSSI to train early childhood educators in STEM. And what does that mean? That means during their professional development days, their classroom observations, these teachers choose to incorporate STEM into their classroom. It is, however, a limited amount. So we have a cohort of 20 teachers, and this is year 3. So this is one of the places where we need to start. And I think the work that folks are doing in high school is courageous. However, we cannot talk about quality math and science education just in high school. It's got to start much sooner. So what are we doing in elementary grades? And so I do believe that it is about students engaging in the work. So 2 years ago, I take that back. 5 years ago, we had a collaboration with Pepco, who they had a pilot program for engineering as elementary in a few selective schools. 3 years ago, I acquired $750,000 so that we can have EIE in every elementary school for every grade level. So K through 5, we now have an engineering curriculum for all students in every school. There is a challenge because my competition is with literacy. I'm still fighting against that 120 minutes. It's only but so many hours in a day, and we spend 2 of them teaching kids how to read. And then we also have a collaboration with the Department of Energy. So we rarely acknowledge that poor Black and brown kids like myself like to go outdoors. So we have a collaboration with the Department of Energy where they fund for every 5th grade student to have a 3-day, 2-night experience outdoors. And we have collaborations with 4 outdoor spaces in the Maryland, Virginia, DC area. In middle grades, we're doing a few things. We have a grant with Lockheed Martin to bring Project Lead the Way to every school, and that includes computer science, engineering, robotics, and I'll take it back to engineering. We have civil engineering, and I want to say mechanical. So Project Lead the Way, they have an elementary curriculum called Launch. They have a middle grade curriculum called Gateway, and then they have different curricula for high school. And so last year the mayor gave us $1 million to bring this program to middle grades. And so prior to the $1 million that we got from the mayor, we got $3 million from Lockheed Martin to do this work. So my goal is to continue on with pilots, but closed mouths don't get fed. So if you give me $3 million, I'm gonna take it. But however long, if you give me $300,000, I'm gonna take it. How about you give me $30,000? I'm gonna make it work. So we are growing the work that pilot groups, the seed money, to make them more sustainable. Also, in middle grades, we have a program with Verizon and Need, which they're doing some great work with energy spaces. And so our time is very limited in the classroom, so the Need project, we're working with librarians. And again, that is by choice, so this is still in the pilot space. Oh, and our cornerstone work for our middle grades is we are doing work with 3D planners, which is absolutely fabulous, but again, we are short on time because we are doing the 3D printing the last quarter after Park. Right, do I need to say more? And I didn't talk too much about the high school space because we're still working on what does that look like comprehensively. We are doing a lot of revisions to our current curriculum and supports. So prior to my arrival in DCPS, we did not have curricular resources that was solid K-12. We did not have assessments, we didn't have formative assessments, we didn't have diagnostic assessments. So we are moving to the space where we can provide more quality resources for all teachers K-12. So, as you know, my story of not being a strong reader, I believe that STEM education is critical to the success of students. And I think that allows students who are not traditionally successful in school the space and the opportunity to grow. I believe that wholeheartedly in both my personal and professional life and the work that I do every day. And so STEM education is about students learning hands-on and being actively engaged in the work and having them invested in a way that I think oftentimes math can leave students out. I think it is now time that we push students to think about the world around them, to think about what's next, and to ensure that they are at least able to challenge themselves to think about it. Do we have all students coming to the table in Algebra 1 ready? Probably not. Do we have half? Unfortunately, no. However, they are intelligent and we can push them to grow so that they are able to learn. Believe it or not, I had algebra in my last graduate degree, and it was hard. I mean, at 45, it was hard. So that does not stop folks from learning. So it is really about us recognizing that we have intelligent students in our classroom that are significantly behind, but that does not stop them from growing and learning. In summary, K-12 STEM education is about the foundational work that we need to do, and it is an opportunity that we must give students so that they can apply their learning, and that it moves beyond sort of this isolation. We want them to know algebra so that they can get to the quantum physics. We want them to learn earth-space science so they can think about the astro science that NSF has provided funding for. So it's really about us not teaching in isolation and then allowing students to learn and grow. We cannot continue to teach to a community of test takers. We must teach to a community of learners, because right now it's part. In a couple of years it's going to be something else. Our opportunity now is to teach a community of thinkers and learners. Thank you.
Well, thank you again. Y'all were amazing. I love listening to you. We are slightly on schedule, aren't we? But that's okay, because, I mean, once again, like I said, thank you again, because you were amazing. Can we give our speakers one more applause? All right, so now we get to enjoy some of these sessions. So as I said, we're about 15 minutes behind, but that's fine. We can move expeditiously to the different rooms. If you look at your agenda, if you open it all the way up, you'll see the breakout sessions for the morning. There are...